The auctioneer at a storage facility off 11th Street in Tulsa opened Unit 114 at $10 and got nothing. 6 bidders had already looked inside, smelled what was in there, and walked back toward their trucks. Standing at the back of the crowd was a 22-year-old woman in a gas station uniform, in a shirt she had ironed that morning, across the passenger seat of the car she slept in. She raised her hand and said, "25. Nobody bid against her. What none of those men in that hallway understood was that she was not there for furniture. She was there for a list of 3 things, and one of them was inside that unit. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 13 years earlier. Her name is Kayla Mercer, and she entered the Oklahoma foster system at 9 years old. Between 9 and 18, she lived in 11 different placements. 2 foster homes in Sapulpa, a group home in Muskogee, a therapeutic placement outside Bartlesville that she left after 4 months, a kinship placement with an aunt that ended when the aunt lost her own apartment. She changed schools 7 times. She learned to keep everything she owned in a duffel bag she could pack in under 4 minutes, because more than once that was all the notice she got. On her 18th birthday, she aged out. In Oklahoma, aging out is not a ceremony. There is a meeting, there is paperwork, and then there is a curb. Kayla walked out of her last placement with a black trash bag of clothes, a bus pass, $312 in a transitional stipend, and a photograph of her younger brother taped inside the cover of a spiral notebook. His name is Elijah. He is 6 years younger than she is. They were separated at the very beginning, placed in different counties, and for most of her childhood, Kayla saw him at supervised visits in a beige county office with a box of donated toys in the corner. Between those visits, she kept a count in the spiral notebook. Not a diary, just numbers. Days since the last time she had been in a room with her brother. Some of the numbers in that notebook run into the hundreds. One of them runs past 400. Now, that notebook matters later, so hold on to it. Elijah was in a group home in Creek County, and his caseworker had told Kayla the same thing 3 separate times, in almost the same words each time. If Kayla had a stable, verified residence, and a separate sleeping space for him with a door on it, and a real mailing address the state could send mail to, then she could be considered as a kinship placement. Without all 3, the conversation was over before it started. She had none of the 3. She had a car, and there was a clock on it, which is the part that made every month after this one feel the way it did. Elijah was 16. At 18, he would age out exactly the way his sister had, with a bag and a curb and nobody's phone number, and once that happened, there was no placement to apply for, because there would be nothing left to place. Kayla had somewhere under 2 years to produce 3 things she had never had in her life. For 4 years after she aged out, she was homeless in Tulsa. Not the version people picture on the news. She worked the entire time. She worked overnight stocking at a distribution warehouse near the airport. She worked the register at a gas station on Peoria. She cleaned 2 office buildings downtown on weekends. She slept in a 1998 Buick Century with the seat reclined and a folded moving blanket over the window, parked in the corner of a 24-hour laundromat lot where the woman who ran the place, Dolores, let her stay as long as she bought something and moved the car before the morning rush. She washed her hair in the sink of a truck stop off Interstate 44. She kept her work shirts on hangers hooked over the back seat headrest so they would not wrinkle, because a wrinkled shirt is how people find out. In 4 years, she never told a single supervisor. Not once. So she started going to storage auctions, because a coworker at the warehouse resold auction furniture on Facebook Marketplace and cleared a few $100s a month doing it, and a few $100s a month was the difference between her situation and a deposit. She went to 11 auctions across Tulsa and Broken Arrow before she ever bid on anything. She stood at the back with her arms crossed and watched what the resellers looked at and what made them shake their heads. She learned to check the ceiling for water stains before she looked at anything else. She learned that furniture stacked flat instead of upright usually means somebody quit in the middle of a move. And she learned the thing that eventually made her $25 matter, which is that everybody in that crowd is working off the same 40 seconds of light from the doorway, and that not one of them ever walks inside. Unit 114 was a 10 by 30 drive up at the end of the last row, and by every measure that crowd cared about, it was a bad unit. There was a brown water line across the bottom of the cardboard about 8 inches up, which meant the sprinkler head above it had gone off at some point, and nobody had come to look. There was black mold blooming across the underside of a mattress leaned against the left wall. The smell was genuinely awful. Every reseller there did the math on the dump fees and stepped back. Kayla bid because of what she could see over the top of the boxes. About 15 feet back, in the dark, there was a curve of white metal roughly 7 feet off the ground that was not furniture and was not an appliance. It was too big and too round for either. She had no idea what it was. She had a shift starting at 11 and about $90 to her name, and she bid anyway. It took her 9 days to empty the front of that unit. She hauled 32 contractor bags to the county landfill in the trunk and back seat of the Buick, 6 bags at a time, paying the tipping fee out of gas station tips. She scrapped a ruined refrigerator and 2 bed frames for $41 at a metal yard on the north side. She wore a respirator, borrowed from a guy at the warehouse, and gloves she bought for $4. On the 9th day, she pulled down the last stack of boxes and found herself standing in front of a 1993 Chevy P30 step van. An old bakery delivery truck. Faded white, with the ghost of a company logo sanded off the side panel and never repainted. 14 feet of box behind the cab. 4 flat tires sitting in dust. No keys anywhere. 2 of the roof rivets had let go, and there was rust blooming around the seam. Inside the cargo box, somebody had built plywood shelving down both walls, and mice had been living in it long enough to have raised generations. She sat down on the concrete floor of that unit and did not move for a long time. And here is the part of the story people skip, because it does not look like anything, and it is the part that stops almost everybody. A truck does not become yours because you won an auction. Vehicles come with titles, and titles come with the state. The previous renter had died. There was no next of kin on the file, so Kayla spent the next 11 weeks working the Oklahoma storage lien process, filing an abandoned vehicle title application, arranging a certified VIN inspection, and sitting in tag agency waiting rooms on her days off, with a folder of paperwork she assembled one denial at a time. She was denied twice for incomplete filings. Both times she took the rejection home, read what was missing, and refiled. Think about what that actually is. She was sleeping in a Buick, she was working overnights. And she was voluntarily spending her days off in a government waiting room, on a truck that did not run, for a process with no guarantee at the end of it. On a Tuesday in July, in an air-conditioned tag office on Memorial Drive, a clerk slid a title across the counter with her name printed on it. Kayla Mercer, 22 years old, no permanent address, owner of record. She has said since that it was the first thing she ever owned that the state of Oklahoma agreed she owned. That was requirement 1. A verified residence starts with an asset the state can verify. She had it on paper. She just could not move it, because a titled truck sitting on 4 flats inside a storage unit is a very large paperweight. So she made a deal with the facility manager, a man named Ray Delgado who had been running that property for 19 years. She would work Saturdays clearing out the abandoned units he had to clear anyway, hauling and sorting and sweeping, and in exchange, he would let her keep the truck in the back corner of the lot behind the fence line and work on it after hours. He also gave her a key to the water spigot on the north wall. Of everything Ray handed her, that spigot turned out to be the important one. Getting the truck out of the unit took 4 cans of tire sealant, a borrowed compressor, and a flatbed operator who charged her $60 and told her he had never once pulled a vehicle out of a storage unit before. Now, before the engine, before any of the build, you need to understand what she was actually building, because otherwise the next 12 months look like a van conversion video, and they are not. The caseworker had been specific about requirement 2. Elijah needed a separate sleeping space, and when Kayla asked whether a curtain would satisfy that, the caseworker said no. Not a curtain, a door. That is the entire project. Every board that went into that truck over the following year existed to hold up a wall 5 feet behind the cab with a solid door hung in it, because a 16-year-old boy in Creek County needed a room, and the state of Oklahoma was not going to accept a suggestion of one. Kayla knew the dimension of that wall before she knew what the floor was going to be made of. She had it written on the same page of the notebook where she kept the numbers. If you are getting something out of this, hit subscribe. There is a new one of these every week, and they are all about people who got out through work instead of luck. By the following spring, she had a truck on a lot, a title in a folder, and an engine that had not turned over since roughly the Obama administration. Getting a 30-year-old V8 running is not a montage. It took 4 months. The fuel in the tank had turned to varnish. The rubber lines were cracked all the way through. The battery was long dead, the belts were glazed and split. The brake lines had rusted through in 2 places, and there was a rodent nest packed into the air intake that she removed with a shop vacuum and a considerable amount of profanity. She learned that engine out of a library copy of a Chilton manual and a laminated shop diagram, working with a socket set she bought for $11 at a Saturday estate sale in Sand Springs, because she did not own a single tool when she started. Then Carmen Ortega found out about the truck. Carmen ran a 2-bay fleet and diesel shop about a mile from the storage facility and had been fixing box trucks and service vans for delivery companies across Tulsa County for 26 years. She heard about a kid rebuilding a step van in a storage lot from one of Ray's other tenants, drove over on a Sunday, walked around the truck twice, and told Kayla that the frame was straight, the block was probably fine, and everything else was going to be miserable. Carmen did not do the work for her. That matters. And Carmen has been blunt about it every single time she has been asked. What Carmen did was unlock the shop on Sundays when it was closed, put the truck on a lift twice, and stand there with her arms folded, telling Kayla what she was doing wrong. Kayla dropped and cleaned the fuel tank herself. She ran the new fuel lines herself. She bled the new brake lines herself, badly, 3 separate times, until the pedal finally stopped going to the floor. She pulled a rebuilt starter off a wrecked truck at a salvage yard in Tulsa for $35. In month 5, on a Sunday evening in the back lot, with Carmen sitting on an overturned bucket drinking a gas station coffee, the engine turned over, caught, ran rough, and then smoothed out. Kayla stood there with her hand on the fender and cried, which she has described as embarrassing, in front of a woman she barely knew. Carmen told her to stop crying and listen to the exhaust note, because there was still a leak in it. Then the actual building started, and every stage of it was measured against a wall she had not built yet. She gutted the cargo box first. Out came the plywood shelving, the nests, the old rubber matting, every screw and bracket. She took the floor down to bare metal with a wire wheel on a borrowed angle grinder, treated the surface rust, and sealed it. She replaced the 2 failed roof seams with butyl tape and lap sealant, then sat inside during the first rainstorm afterward, with a flashlight looking for drips, and found 2 more. The floor came out of an elementary school in West Tulsa that had closed and was being stripped before demolition. Kayla found the demolition foreman, offered to help his crew load and sweep for nothing, and asked for the gym floor. Nobody else wanted it. She pried up strips of tongue and groove maple, pulled the old nails on the gravel, sanded them by hand, and laid them inside that truck 1 board at a time. There are still faint painted lines from the free throw arc running across the floor of her kitchen. She left them there deliberately. Insulation came from a subdivision going up in Owasso. She asked the site superintendent for the rigid foam offcuts that were headed to the dumpster and got a truck bed full of them for the cost of hauling them away. She cut every piece to fit between the wall ribs with a bread knife, sealed the gaps with canned foam, and covered the interior in cedar fence pickets at about $2 each, sanded smooth and hung horizontal, so the box looked wider than it was. Water came next. She built a 35-gallon fresh tank into a bench, ran PEX line off it, and installed a propane on-demand water heater she bought for $65 off a man in Broken Arrow who was clearing out his father's garage. The shower sits in the back corner, a fiberglass pan she pulled out of a gutted travel trailer, walled in cedar and sealed. Over a tile floor she laid out of a flooring store's damaged bin. Some pieces are gray, some are cream, and 3 are dark green. She put the 3 green ones in the corner where the morning light comes through, on purpose, and she has said she does not intend to ever replace that floor. Power was the one she could not buy, so she waited for weather. After a hailstorm came through the metro, she called every solar installer in the Tulsa area and asked all of them the same question. What happens to the panels that get dinged and replaced under warranty? At one company in Owasso, the answer was that they get stacked behind the shop and eventually hauled off. She traded 3 full weekends helping their crew load and haul in exchange for 2 hail-damaged panels with cracked frames and completely functional cells, plus a used charge controller. She bought a pair of deep cycle batteries second-hand and wired the system with Carmen looking over her shoulder for one very long Saturday. By month 13, there was a kitchen, a 2-burner propane cooktop, a stainless sink pulled out of a scrapped camper, a butcher block counter cut down from a scratched slab in a countertop shop's remnant pile for $30, open cedar shelving, cast iron on hooks, and a 12-volt refrigerator running entirely off the roof. And then she built the wall. 5 feet behind the cab, Kayla framed a partition, insulated it, and hung a solid core door she carried out of a Habitat for Humanity restore on her shoulder. Behind it, she built a bunk with a reading light, a shelf at the head of it, and a window with a screen in it so the room would have its own air. She sanded that bunk frame across 2 full weekends. She rounded every edge on it. Requirement 2 was standing up in the back of a bakery truck. She slept on a camping pad on the bare maple floor for another 2 months after that, because the materials money went into his room first, and there was not enough left for a mattress until March. Which left the last one, and it is the requirement that quietly ends most builds like this. A truck is not an address. Kayla leased a pad at a small residential lot on the east side of Tulsa for $85 a month from a property owner who had heard about the build from Ray. It came with a legal mailbox, a water hookup, and a place she was permitted to be at 2 in the morning without anybody knocking on the glass. She registered the truck, she insured it, she got a state inspection, and she put her name on a mailbox for the first time in her life, on a Tuesday, in the rain. 3 for 3. The list was done. The caseworker home visit happened 7 weeks later. Kayla cleaned that truck for 3 days beforehand and then could not eat the morning of. The caseworker walked the whole thing. She checked the smoke detector. She checked the carbon monoxide detector. She checked the propane shutoff. She ran the tap and watched the water come out hot. Then she opened the door 5 feet behind the cab, and she stood there for a second looking at a bunk with a reading light and a shelf and a screen on the window, and she wrote in her notes that the residence was appropriate and that the sleeping space was separate and secure. 11 days after that, on a Thursday afternoon in a group home parking lot in Creek County, a caseworker signed a form, and Elijah Mercer walked out to his sister's truck. He was 17 years and 4 months old. He had 8 months left before the state stopped counting him. He carried everything he owned in one bag, the same way she had, and he did not say anything on the drive. When they got to the lot, she opened the side door and let him go in first. He walked the length of the box, past the kitchen with the free throw arc on the floor, and he stopped in front of the door. He did not open it right away. He stood there with his hand on the knob, and then he asked her, out loud, whether it locked. She told him yes. From the inside. He went in and shut it behind him, and Kayla stood in her own kitchen and listened to her brother be alone in a room on purpose, for the first time in either of their lives, for about 20 minutes, and then he came back out and asked what was for dinner. That night, for the first time since she was 9 years old, there was nothing to write in the notebook. Elijah is 19 now. He finished at a high school on the east side of Tulsa and works part-time at Carmen's shop, mostly oil changes and tire work, and Carmen says flatly that he is better with a torque wrench than his sister ever was. He still sleeps behind the door she built before she built her own bed. Kayla still works, though she moved off the overnight warehouse shift and does fleet service scheduling now. Roughly twice a month, she runs a Saturday morning session in the back lot of that same storage facility for anybody who wants to learn how to do what she did. She teaches people how to read a unit from the doorway, how to file a storage lien title, which is the session most people show up for and the one nobody else teaches, how to ask a demolition foreman for material without wasting his time, how to find the roof leak before you insulate over it. Ray still lets her use the lot. She has never charged anybody $1, and she has turned down 2 offers to make it a paid course. 7 people have started builds out of that lot. 3 of them are finished and lived in. A woman named Priscilla finished a cargo trailer conversion last spring. A man who spent 2 years sleeping behind a warehouse near the river is most of the way through a school bus. Dolores, who ran the laundromat, comes by sometimes on Saturdays and brings a box of donuts, and she still will not accept gas money for it. The spiral notebook is in a drawer in the kitchen, under the butcher block counter, and the last number in it is 31. She stopped counting on a Thursday, in a parking lot in Creek County, because after that there was nothing left to count. The photograph is still taped inside the front cover. If you got something out of this one, subscribe. There is another one next week, about somebody who found their way out of a hole most people never climb out of, and you will probably recognize the hole.